Welcome to this webinar co-hosted by Avo and Timo Dechau. So today's webinar is about upgrading your tracking plan to pro level in just 45 minutes with Avo. But before we dive quickly into intros, Timo, can you set the stage for today's agenda for us?
Yes, so we are full into intros, so we will close this in a second. And then what I'm trying to show is, like, I mean, we have the topic to take a tracking plan that you have maybe in mind, maybe already on some spreadsheet, usually they are, and then how you can basically evolve it. So, and we approach this from different levels. So one is really like from a conceptual one. So to give some ideas how I create tracking plans, and it's a little bit different than I did it 2 years ago. So this is like the journey I want to show. And then on the other hand is like, what changes if you use a tool like Avo? So what kind of benefit brings it out? And so really to show, okay, why, for example, I create in the end my tracking plans in Avo and not in spreadsheets anymore. And then the third one is even like more interesting, because I think that some people then might not be aware that, so it does not stop with just having a tracking plan that everyone can access and can work together on, but it's even going further. So, I mean, having a plan is cool, but to making sure that it's implemented in the right way, it's even better. And so this is like why we look today into Inspector and to really see how you can use Avo to also track if your tracking implementation is right. And so as someone who's doing a lot of tracking implementation testing, I can tell you anything that helps there is highly welcome. And so that's where we look into.
Awesome. Thank you so much for setting that stage. So basically, we're going to be going through literal examples of tracking plan design. We'll spend about 20 minutes there, and then we will do a live demo of installing the Inspector SDK and for tracking observability, which is also really exciting. And so for that purpose, we have two very special guests with us today, which is Alex and Björse, who are incredible team members at Avo. And I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. And they're basically joining as firefighters, because you know how it goes when we do live demos. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Steph, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Avo. I'll leave it at that, but I've been in data science for around 11 years, and I have a lot of pains around data quality problems and strong beliefs. And you'll learn from Timo why that is today. And over to you, Timo.
Yeah, hi, I'm Timo. So also 15 years in digital stuff, half of the time as a product person using a lot of data, and now as a data person who's using a lot of things that I learned in product to make data better.
Awesome. Alex.
Hey, I'm Alex. I work in developer experience and build SDKs at Avo.
Awesome. Björse.
Hey, I'm Björse, and I'm a senior infrastructure engineer at Avo.
Love it. Yeah. And so Alex built the SDK for the Inspector and the integration with, for example, Segment, where you can turn on Inspector directly through Segment. And Björse has built incredible solutions around the infrastructure for handling incredible volumes of data from some of our customers, including Rappi. I'll never forget when Rappi turned the Inspector on, and that temporarily increased our server cost immensely until Björse joined the team and brought it down. So incredible work, both Björse and Alex. Thank you for all that. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to you, Timo.
Yeah. Give me the screen.
Yes. Stop sharing.
All right. So start with this one. So can you see my screen?
We can see your entire screen, including your entire desktop. Yeah.
Okay. So, but you just see the mirror board.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Okay, so where I want to start is basically like, I mean, creating tracking plan in some kind of tools. And so this really helps, and we will show why it does, but usually it starts before. And so I usually do something which I now call a tracking wireframe. And so because like we do this in product as well. So before we basically start to implement a product feature, we gather some ideas, and this is the same what we do here as well. And so I'm taking an example, and I take an example where I'm quite confident with, because I've worked on this quite a lot. And this is basically like I'm creating this for an agency, which is my agency as well. And so I'm doing this for mine, and we can do this for different kind of examples as well. But this one is like the one that goes easiest because yeah, I know all these stuff. So I think the major difference how I work with tracking plans is basically like in the past, I did it very event based. And so it was really like looking at all the different kind of events that can happen on a website from a backend and within an app, and then designing all this kind of different kind of events. The problem with this approach is like you immediately end up with a lot of events. And so I had tracking plans who were even like an initial state where not over 3 years or so, already had 40, 50 events, because these were all around different kind of product features that are important for this company, of course. But the problem is like implementing this in a full implementation mode is nearly impossible. So you can only do it in batches. And it also makes it sometimes difficult to understand, to map the tracking concept or the events to the business. And so what has changed a lot is not something that I think invented. So there were a lot of people already trying out different kind of approaches. And so this approach, so for example, Snowplow is basically also built around that. And it's really like to put something in the center, which is like your business entities. And so these are like the business objects that you work with every day, and that basically define your business, and then take this as a centerpiece and then build everything around it. And that makes it easier, at least like in the setups that I work with, to really connect the kind of data that you track to your business, because for everyone who's then working with that, it's for them really easy to understand. And so, for example, I mean, I'm in an agency, so of course we have different kind of entities. And so one is like a project. So this is what we often do, what we offer. So then we have clients, and these are entities as well. Of course, we need clients to do projects. And before clients become clients, we have them as leads. And so these are, yeah, so in stage, so we could also call them opportunities or so on. So it depends a little bit on what kind of language you're using. We come to another point, which is also like important with a tracking plan, is really like find the language that you are speaking within your company, because it doesn't make sense to use something you saw somewhere, but no one really understands. So this is like why you have to work together on this. So right now I'm doing this on my own, but usually I would sit down with everyone later working with the data to really see, okay, do they understand the taxonomy? Do they understand what's happening? And so we have that. And so, for example, what we also have, which is a little bit different to other agencies, so we have packages. So basically these are solution packages. So tracking plan, for example, creating a tracking plan is a package that we offer where people can say, yeah, we need a tracking plan. As we say, yeah, we have a package for that. And so they get a full, let's say, they basically know what they get. And so they get a full description, what we do with them. And so they can simply book it, and it's a fixed price. And so by that, it works really nice. And of course, we could maybe add another one here as well, and which is like we produce a lot of content. So for example, like this video, and we also do a lot of blog posts and live sessions and so on. And so this is basically the things that we do when we don't do projects. And so I collect all the different kind of entities I work with. And then I go a step further and say, okay, let's focus on the project and see, okay, life cycle of a project, what stuff is happening. So of course, like a project is created. And so I'm collecting all the different kind of actions that can happen around a project. So a project can be started, because this can be different to create it, because I can create it, but it does not have to actually start it. And then it can be finished. And then it can be, I don't know, renewed in a way, could be like that someone says, okay, I want to do a similar thing in a different entity. And so you collect different kind of actions that can basically happen around this kind of entity. And this is just a start. So usually, like when I sit down longer, I usually then maybe come up with 4 or 5 different kind of actions that are important. That what I do is basically classify them. So I say, okay, what are the important ones? Okay, for me, it might be important when they actually start and then when they're finished. And so these are the ones that I definitely want to make sure that I track them. And so it really makes sense to take some time and really define all the different kind of actions that can happen to this kind of entity, and then later really filter out, okay, which are, or to make priority list, which are the kind of actions that are really important for you, to then implement them first and to use them as what I usually call the core business events. And then we can think about properties. And so there are stuff that describes a project. And so usually do is like I give myself a little bit more space because nope, should not do it in a too small way, but I'll just get rid of the error in a second. But what I want to show is like, okay, zooming in again. So I map this out. So these are different actions. And then what I say is like I define properties. And so properties are basically giving context to how I work with stuff, how I track things. And so the context is important because this in the end enables me later to build specific kind of segments and specific kind of other things. And so what I'm doing here is, so, okay, I can call it maybe project budget. Then I can have it a different type. So it can be, let's say, a standard, using a standard package, or it can be custom. So it's important for me to know that in the end. Then maybe project estimated time. And then maybe also something which is like track time. So this is like a property that can change over time, which I can add to this over time to really see, okay, how much time has already been tracked against this project. So I have these kind of things, and I might have also properties which are just bound to a specific kind of action. So when it comes to started, maybe I really want to send a specific start date with this one. I mean, this is a difficult case. I could also say, okay, this is important, interesting for all project events, but okay, let's assume this is just important for the started event. So I define properties that are basically relevant for all events. So I define them here, and then I define properties which are just specific for specific kind of actions. And this is how I work with wireframe. And then at some point I say, okay, this already looks quite good. And so now it may really make sense to put it in a different level. And so in the past, I first used spreadsheets a lot. And so I think this is the usual approach, how everyone approaches tracking plans. So they start with a spreadsheet because a spreadsheet solves everything. And but there are some limitations. So for example, when I do this in a spreadsheet and I want to change how I name start date, or how I in general want to name my properties. So because I don't want to use snake case, instead I just want to write it as they are. I have to go in every cell into a spreadsheet to change it there. And so it's really, really tedious work to do this. And this is a simple example. So other stuff can happen. So it makes more sense to have it in a more modular approach where I can basically really have the property as its own object, because it also makes sure that I don't use start date here like this, and maybe later I use it in a different naming, and so in a different, so that I don't really double stuff or maybe create duplicates, which don't really make sense. And so I moved on then to Airtable because it can solve the relation thing, but it does not really help me beyond. So it was better than spreadsheet, but not really something that really speeds up my whole process, and especially doesn't really make it easy to collaborate on a tracking plan. Because what I already said is like collaboration in a tracking plan is the most important thing. And so then I was starting to work with Avo, and their stuff really changed for me. And so just to give you an example how I do this. And so what I can do, I mean, I can basically now transfer what I just created and can transfer into Avo. And so what I can do is basically I can start to create all the different kind of events that I just described. And what I do is like I usually take the entity and the action together as an event name. So in that case, it would be like project created. And when I create these things, I usually really just do what you see right now. I'm just like writing it down. I also have some cases where it's bigger, where I use some kind of import functions, and because Avo has the possibility that it can import a spreadsheet, or can even do fancy stuff using an API to push stuff into it. And so there are different ways how you can approach this, but since we have a small one, I can just start to do this manually, because as you can see, they have this one of my favorite features in modern software as a service app, which is like I'm hitting Command K and get the quick command line, and I can, as you can see, I can easily.
Yay! Shout out Braille.
Yes.
As a Christmas cool down project that we had been wanted for such a long time.
Yeah, and I was really happy when it came around, because now it really, so before I was quite quick to setting up a new tracking plan, but now I'm even quicker to do all this kind of stuff. So let's do a final one, just finish. And so I'm creating all the events, and then I go down to the properties. And so here you can see, so I can add all the different kind of properties. So right now everything is isolated, not really connected. So we do this in a second. And so let me create these. No, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to create a property. So like project name, where I'm not 100% sure if it's a good idea to track it, but let's keep it in here. And then also like, because this is more important, project budget. So let's take these two. And then what I usually do, because I said, okay, these are different kind of properties which are important for all project events. And then I think, so Steph, you pointed me to this feature at some point where, and I think this was the last step where I then basically said, okay, I do everything in Avo, because the way I'm working is like, since I define the properties around an entity, so I reuse them a lot. And so what is really helpful for me is basically like, I can create something which is called a property group. So event property group. So I can group properties that I reuse a lot of times. And so we do this, and I do this around the entity. So in that case, around a project. So I create this one. And what I can do now is like, I can add all the different kind of properties that belong to this group. So this one, and this one. And of course I can extend it. And the nice thing that you will see now is basically like, even when I later say, okay, I have new properties which are relevant for all actions and events around a project. And if I add them here, they immediately become available for all the different kind of events. So this is really what is really makes it really powerful to use this. So shout out to my a little bit hidden feature of event property groups, but it's a little bit bound to my specific use. Yeah.
Thank you for highlighting it. We were literally looking at data last week that showed us that discovering properties, event property groups is highly correlated with becoming an Avo power user. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you should really make some gamification around this. So when someone discovers the group, so that you can that you get this highlighted that you're now officially a power user. Because the cool thing I can show you now, so here you can see all the events that I just created. And so here is this fancy thing where I have my property groups. What I can do here is basically really like say, okay, these guys are all using the project property group because they are all around project. And they now all inherit all the properties that I just defined for the project. And as I said, so if I say, where we need to track more stuff around project and we introduce something which is relevant for all, I just have to change it in one place.
Yeah.
This makes it really powerful for me to really use this. And so let me add also like one category that I always use, which is like my core category. So keep this thing. And so here I can then easily just assign everything. So these are my core events. And so I want to highlight them in that kind of way. And so I just said, okay, I have also like event property, which is like start. And then I could find it. I don't know. I can add here too. Yes. Can I edit if I just started? I never really tried. Yes. Okay.
Bingo.
Update. Excellent.
Designed to make your life easier.
Yes. Okay, so I did this as well. And so as you can see, so I'm doing a lot of stuff just like really to filling it up. And I don't really qualify things in the end right now. So this is something that now comes later where I basically really say, well, an event without a description is not an event. So just to highlight out, use the description field. So what I really like is like that you point this out, that there's no description in place. And you have this cool new feature which is called audit, where you also point out stuff which might be wrong. I don't know, do you point out if description is missing in the audit as well?
Yes, bingo.
Okay. Excellent.
You can
Because
see
like
the audit right there on the alerts further down next to tracking plan, bingo. You see there, 3
there
events.
we go. Don't have a description. And why is the highlight really important? Because in the end, the description will save your life in the future. It will save your own life. And so think about all your teammates who love to have a description, but think about yourself for a second. I'm someone who always believes I can remember everything. And so I always believe that I can remember, okay, how I made the definition for this event and how we implemented it. But trust me, I usually forget it after 2 to 3 weeks. And so, and especially like when I work with clients for some time, of course, like in the implementation project, I usually knew what we have defined. But coming back even 8 weeks later, and so then maybe doing some dashboards. Oh, cool! You make a poll. That's good.
Yeah.
Making
property groups already.
Yeah. And so, for example, to create a dashboard, and then I have to remember what this event is about. So then my memory is already a little bit blurry, and so descriptions save your life in the future. So as much context as you can put into this will help you to really make sure that everyone understands how you track this. And so I'm trying to be as precise as possible. So for example, project created, something like when a new project is created in, so for example, I use ClickUp to manage everything. So in ClickUp, and what I can also do, and so we'll talk about this in a second, but I try to put it in a description as well. So usually like send via webhooks from ClickUp. And so this is, for example, how I track my project created stuff. And which brings us to a point. On the one hand, so we don't see it because I think I just created a demo space, and so we don't have source. So what I could do here is like triggered when. So I can define, for example, I could, in this case, it doesn't make sense because the data comes from a webhook, but if it's tracked on a website, I could add a screenshot here to really show, okay, this is where the event is basically happening. And I can highly recommend to use this. So to having a visual representation of where an event is happening is solving so many questions. So like people asking, actually, we are tracking this newsletter subscription, but where do we do this? And so then show it with a picture. And I made even like for the future, maybe we can even add videos. So I would really love to have a Loom integration here. So where I can quickly do a Loom video and really show, because then it's really clear to really explain, okay, when someone hits this button, once you get the success measures, this is then when the event is triggered, because these are the questions that will come up in the future where people were asking, okay, when do we track this? And what I can also do is like, I can add a source. And so, and this brings us a little bit into what we look next into, and which will be the inspector, because like making a plan is great, but we have to implement it at some place. And so this is usually a source, and I can set up a new source for that.
Timo, can I raise my hand?
Sure, always.
So one thing that could be fun to do in this before you start setting up the sources here, and before, if you also want to add a screenshot, is to, right now you are editing your tracking plan on the main branch. I think it's worth here creating a branch and doing some of the rest of the changes on a branch. What do you think about that?
I think that's a very good idea.
And then we can see what the diff view looks like as well. So then you go.
So quick, just let me quickly explain about the branches. And so, like, I mean, for people with development background, I think it's quite obvious initially, because like, if you work with a lot of people on a tracking plan, it can happen that you work in different kind of areas, but you really don't want to use Slack as you're basically managing this. Like, hey, yeah, I'm now editing this and now editing this. And so people can have work, for example, on an implementation for a specific product feature. So this can be interesting. And then you maybe don't want to do this in your basically in production tracking plan, because like, as we all know, editing in production without testing is usually not a good idea. So I can create a new branch. And so I can say, I'm currently working on the project event implementation. And yes, please. So, and here we are. So I'm basically now not editing the stuff on our production tracking plan, but I'm creating it basically on a new version, which is not checked into the production plan. So I can play around. So I can really do stuff that currently is just visible to me who's working in the branch. Of course, other people can also work in the branch. I don't know. Can you assign people to a branch?
You can if you go to view changes. Mm-hmm. You haven't made any changes right now, but if you go, for example, to one of the events and add
let's do that.
Yeah, or that, yeah, and or if you can add a screenshot as well or a trigger, well, then you have to add a source first. Yeah, let's go through adding sources and then we can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Let me do this. So in my case, I mean, these are all for me. Let's assume I track this in the web. So I create the source, and then because I use, for example, let's assume I use segment in that case. So create this as a destination. So what I can also do is like, so we will touch base a little bit this in a second, but I can put in all my different kind of destination keys for segment when I send data to segment. And okay, so I think when we now view changes, we will see some stuff here happening. And this is really quite useful. So you can really see, okay, what the persons who already worked on this branch are basically adding to the new, basically the new version of your tracking plan that you might want to merge into this. And you can also see the different kind of options that you have. So on the one hand, you can see changes. So I added a different description here. And here are the sources that I just added, and the destination as well. And what I can do here is like I could merge the branch. Is this something different that you want to show as well?
I wanted to highlight that right there. You can edit collaborators in the upper right corner, and that means in the far upper right corner.
Yeah. Okay.
That's on the team plan.
Yes.
And you can also mention people in the comments.
Yes. Okay.
Team plan, and that's how you can, and then you can turn on Slack integrations with this workspace so that all changes like these, branches created, branch marked as ready for review, branch approved, collaborator added, comment added, all of those will get notified into a Slack channel with a notification flow, so you can get an overview of like what are the changes that your team is making.
And this is really great because now we are really moving beyond any kind of spreadsheet. So, I mean, of course, you can add comment to a spreadsheet and so on, but it's not really like that you have one place where you can follow up all different kind of changes. I mean, of course, yeah, you can see a little bit in the Google spreadsheet, but it's not really handy. So it's basically costing you a lot of time. And this is basically stuff that saves you a lot of time to really see what you can do. So I'm trying now to merge this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
you
think
don't even have to merge it right now, but that's also, but you can also merge it. But
Okay.
basically, like you can stay in the playground if you want.
No, I
But
think I'm quite confident.
We have a couple of questions about we have a couple of questions about the tracking plan setup.
Let's do that.
Are you diving next into the inspector setup? Is that
I would do. Yeah, let's make a break for that.
Exciting. So a great question from Benjamin Bach. Is there any rationale for your event naming convention here? So uppercase project versus lowercase interaction. And then also, and I left this as a comment in the chat as well. I also find it super interesting always how people choose different naming conventions, sometimes for properties and events. At AVO, we just use title case for both properties and events, but I see a lot of like, sometimes properties are snake case, for example, and you ended up doing snake case for properties, but basically sentence case for your event names with an uppercase for the first, for the entity or the object, and the lowercase for the interaction. Can you talk about your naming convention for Ben?
It's totally ridiculous. I think in the end, when I do it, it's really based on preferences in some ways, and also like I think the snake case for properties goes back because in some implementations we had some issues with the defining the keys there for some implementation. And so I think I stick with to do it as developer close as possible. And since I come from Python, so snake case is basically the for me the way to go. So I don't do camel case. But so in the end, it's basically what fits best, let's say, to the team who's managing the tracking plan. And I mean, the reason why I use then the usual title case for my events, because I want to have my events as easy to understand as possible. And so, I mean, if I would be consistent, I would do the same for properties as well. And I think I might do this in the future as well, because in the end, what I end up experiencing is like these event names and these event stuff will end up in your analytics tools in some place. And so people work with that who never really have any kind of tech background, who never really was so deep included into the whole tracking plan stuff. And so they basically have to understand an event immediately. So I think this is the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is a really great question. I think the key here is like sticking to a convention. I think I really agree and relate to Benjamin's question specifically about the uppercase for the first word versus lowercase for the second word. Mm-hmm. And it's like I think one
maybe it's just sloppy for me because I never really.
It's like sentence case is less of a problem with AVO in place, might be one without it though. Can you elaborate on that, Benjamin? Why is it a problem without it? And while you do, I'll share also an interesting problem with title case. So because there are multiple versions of title case, depending, like there are multiple conventions for title case. And that will govern, for example, whether you treat the letter A as uppercase or not. And sometimes whether you capitalize the word to will depend on which title case you're choosing. So this can cause literal conflictions with, and you can end up with two events with the same case there, with the two different cases.
I think it also goes back to native language of the team usually, like, so because like, I don't know, so we Germans may handle the title case a little bit different than maybe other languages and so on. So it's
that's a good point. And then one more point that I also try to always just keep in mind for these, if I'm going with title case, for example, I try to just steer away from any of those words that have dubious casings. So I try to just not, for example, for add to cart, which is a common event, people often have add to cart, which is an interesting event because it doesn't really follow the object action really. It sort of is action object, but still not. So it's like a bastard. So sometimes I have some problems with defining the name for add to cart. I sometimes have item added and use that, or
That's how I do it.
or cart item added. That's sometimes how I do it. So have two nouns to represent a single object sometimes. But yeah, this is.
I even do something more crazy in this case. I usually enter with two events, which are basically similar, but because I use this entity action thing, I have, let's say I have the entity product, and so then it's product added to cart. So with the context, or just, and then I have cart updated, because I also have the entity of cart. And so basically in the end, they are different, they're different events, but in the end, the same trigger often.
Yeah, I'm going to start a poll on naming conventions as well. But to quickly share the result here, we have a couple of people have tried the group properties. I'm excited to hear if you want to share how you've used them and whether it's been helpful for you so far, and what your use cases are for it. So you can share that in the chat if you're willing. But over to you, Timo, for installing Inspector. And now we have the firefighters on deck if anything goes wrong with the live demos.
I was playing around yesterday with which I can do as a demo, and so I came up with this one. So this is a nice, I mean, of course, if you do a demo, you do it to do a demo. I think that was how we did it in the old times. And so I pulled this up. This is a very simple React app. I think it's even 4 years old, so it doesn't really include any kind of fancy new stuff. So it's even like using the old Redux concept, I assume. So I'm not a front-end developer, so please bear with me. But in the end, I mean, you can easily show different kind of stuff here. And what I want to do is I want to first create, let's say we create 2 events, and then we can basically inspect them if they are tracked in the right way. And so let's do to-do edit as one event, and so another one to do say resolved. Oh no, done is better. As you can see here, so sometimes you really have to think how you name stuff. So this is good when you discuss with people how you name stuff. And so let me here at least add some properties so that we can have this, or let's do it differently and create them for all, which is like maybe the name of the to-do, which, okay, we don't go into detail. So tracking name of a to-do is usually not really useful, because it creates a lot of random data, and so you cannot really use it in downstream tools to really cluster stuff properly, unless you want to do some, I don't know, semantic analysis, or to figure out how often people use test but I just now do it as a quick example, and also like maybe the state. So sorry, I just always have to move the Zoom control panels around.
Relate.
Yeah. So let's do state if it's active or if it's already resolved or not. And so
there you could also say what are the allowed values if you would want to do that.
Yeah, true. Let me do this in a second. No,
we don't have to do that. I just wanted to mention it.
No, I think it's a good point. Quick, and then this one, and because this is basically not a string, but it's a Boolean, because it can be true or false. Let's put it like this. So is it good? Maybe not, but let's keep it for the sake of the example. Okay, so I have defined this, and now I want to implement that. And when I implement it, I want to make sure that the implementation is matching my tracking plan. And this is usually this is like the interesting thing. So when I have to test the tracking plan implementation, this is what I have to do. Like, do people use let's say the kind of case, how I define it here, and do they use the right property names and so on. And so I can do this by hand. I can go into this and can check for, I mean, I'm sending this to segments. So of course I can go to all segment events. Segment, come on, I'm good at typing today. And so I can check here, there are the tracking events. And so of course I can check the payload. And this is how I did it before. I was using Arvo, so going into it and checking all the payload, and can see, okay, does it track the right stuff? So usually like, I think it's in context. No, this is this. No, we have it here in properties. So you can see I have something called done. So this seems to be different. And I have something which is called name. And it also looks a little bit weird in a way. So let's see how we can do this differently. And here basically is the event name. So what I can do is like, I can switch over here. And so maybe first of all, how I do this. And so this is like how our team basically recommends to do it. And so I have a specific, let's call it maybe a wrapper function, which is like my track event, where I here have the call where I send the stuff to segment basically. And as a second step, I send the same stuff to Arvo. So I use the Arvo inspector. This is basically an npm packages installed, and I basically use this event track schema from event. And the interesting thing is like, I mean, what's important to know is like, I don't send the event data actually to Arvo. So the only thing what I do, I mean, I pass on the event data here, but what basically this function is doing, it just takes out the schema. And guys, correct me when I'm telling something wrong here, but it basically just takes out the schema and just sends the schema back to Arvo. So Arvo can basically then check if the schema is in the right way. So you don't send any kind of tracking data back to Arvo, so you only send the schema here. And the nice thing is, once I have wrapped this, because it's using basically the same input data, I can then use this in a different place. So for example, here, I want to track, so this is basically where all my actions come in. And so I want to track when someone is adding a new to-do. And so I can then, so I just import this wrapper function. And so I use it here, and then I use the event name to do edit. And so let me quickly check if this is matching up. Yes. And so I can now go into, oh no, I didn't give it the properties group yet. So of course this is not showing up. And now we see, so we have a state. So let's, no, maybe I do a different thing, just renaming the property because state is not a cool name for it.
Right, so instead of having a state with allowed values, you will have done, which is supposed to be a Boolean.
Exactly. Now this describes it better. And so I can keep done here, and then I have a name. And so one problem is like, I don't really know what kind of payload comes with the action. So I just leave it like this. So maybe it fits, maybe it doesn't. So because it should immediately cause some issues. So let me save that. And okay, looks good so far. So let's reload everything.
And while everything is reloading, just quickly walking through for anyone who is sort of catching up on this, and if this might feel a little bit overwhelming, setting the stage here. So Timo had already developed this app.
Yes, no, I just pulled it from GitHub. Yeah.
Or he pulled it from GitHub, right? And he's now running that app locally on his machine. And he just implemented analytics for this app just using the raw segment SDK.
Yes.
You could use our functions to implement that, but that's not a requirement.
That's a different session. Yeah.
That's a different thing. But even if you used any analytics SDK segment or your own API or amplitude or mixed panel or whatever SDK you're using, even if you're sending from or Brace or sorry, what was that, Timo?
Tag Manager.
Tag Manager, you can turn on Inspector to observe your tracking. And you can turn this also on for all of your existing tracking as well. So now Timo was sort of starting fresh with tracking, so there's not a lot of tracking in place, but he could have turned this on for a lot of existing tracking as well to just quickly get a snapshot of his existing tracking. And then also use it for sort of ongoing validation of each branch that he basically implements. Just wanted to set that stage, Timo.
No, that's really good. And I think this was also like the kind of revelation I had, is really like to so that I don't really have to wrap everything in between. So it's just like an extension. So I can take what I already do and I can just take the payload that I'm now sending to, let's say, GA or anywhere else. And I can take the same payload and just say, okay, with maybe a little bit of mapping, I can then just send it to Arvo as well. And so the beauty is, on the one hand, like my initial tracking testing goes down from 1 hour to, I don't know, 5 minutes. So when I test a full tracking setup, it's even longer than an hour. So usually like it's half a day. So if it's a full blown thing, and now we will see it in a second. So now it's really like I implement it and I can get immediate feedback. But I think the one thing that is even more important is like, I have this instantly. So I have this running in my background. And so whenever, I mean, let's put it like this, the initial tracking is usually really good often, like, and then it goes live and everyone is happy. But I mean, businesses are moving on and tech development is moving on. And so stuff can break. And so you want to have monitoring, you want to have constant checks on your stuff. And so this is, I think, the more, even like more powerful thing that, that you always can check, for example, within Arvo, if your tracking is still working properly. So long speaking, let's see what it does. So it's loading a lot of stuff. So you can now here see on the right, you can see all. So we're first checking for the segment stuff, and then in a second we check what we're basically sending out to Arvo. So maybe as a context, and let me do this a little bit bigger, what you see right now, so for everyone who's not so technically, so I'm opening this up, which is called the developer console. And I have a tab which basically people who do a lot of tracking implementation are basically married to. And this is like the network tab. And the network tab is basically showing me all the stuff that is either sending out from the website or is basically like loaded within. So as you can see here, I'm filtering down to segment. So if I take this off, so you can see it's loading a lot of stuff. So it's loading some JavaScript files, loading some CSS files and so on. So, but it's really cool because in the end, if here no request is going out to any kind of your analytics solution, your tracking does not work. So you can make sure that you really go down. So this is basically the route where you can see if your tracking is not working, here you can see at least, okay, if it's sending out stuff, then the issue is maybe somewhere else. But if you're missing, let's say, the tracking requests already here, then it's quite natural that your tracking is not working. And it takes some time because it's very technical. So when you work with segment, for example, the P, so the P endpoint is usually like for page view, and then the T1 is for if you track an event. But the more you work with it, the more it becomes familiar. And so let's try this out. Test 1, 2, whatever. And
But
so
you
we
said that the network tab is something that analysts are married to. I totally relate. That's why we built the debugger and all of this. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. And so as you can see here, so there appeared another request, and this is basically like the track request that you can see here. And so we can see here, there's the event to do edit, and here we can see the properties, so it's done false. And we can already see the name thing definitely has a problem because like the payload is basically passing on an object. So this might cause some issues, but let's see what it does. So just to make sure what we sent to Arvo. So let me just filter down to Arvo, and here you can see as well, I think this one is, let's see, yeah, I think this one was the track event that I sent. And let me open it. Oh, I cannot, yeah. For some reason I wanted to show this one here, but I cannot select it. Not a problem because I think it doesn't updated it properly. Yeah, this is still the segment stuff. It doesn't make sense. Because this is not what we sent here. Okay. Because this is more interesting. This is actually what I wanted to show. So what you can already see here is like, we actually don't send the tracking data. So in that case, we just send property name, it's done, and property type is Boolean. And so this is what I wanted to show. It's like, so we just send basically the schema information back to Arvo. And we can also, here we have a sampling rate of 1, which is interesting. So because like you already mentioned, like it's like Arvo is also capable if you basically are running a video platform and you're sending a heartbeat event every 5 seconds, I think you can handle this as well. So this is not a problem for you. How does this kind of sampling work? So you just take a specific sample and then analyze it.
Were you asking how the sampling for the inspector works?
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe Björsi wanted to talk about it, but maybe before we dive into it, should we see it full circle and flow into the Avo inspector maybe?
Let's do that. And so
I
we can
love that
see
you highlighted this, like basically you're showing that the track call for segment, that is actually sending the data, but the track event from schema call that's sending data into Avo, that's not sending any personally identifiable data, it's just sending the schemas.
And not even like, even not PII data, but also like any kind, it doesn't send any kind of data, which is like in GDPR times, it's really good to know what kind of tracking thing that you put on your website is actually sending data to some kind of service. And so here you can really make sure that it's just like about your schema. And let's go back and let's go into the inspector. And so we have to do edit. And here we can see, so this is basically telling me there's an issue. And so, okay, so this is what it should really tell me. So in the end, it tells me the tracking plan expected a string here at that case for the name. So I defined a string, but actually what I sent was an object. So if we go back, so sorry, it's quite technically, but let's look at the segment stuff again, because there we can see the actual data. And for some reasons, here we go. And so here you can see as a name, because I was not sure what kind of data I get, I was just sending this kind of object here. And I mean, I wanted to send this text. So of course, this is stuff I did wrong. And I get this highlighted here immediately. So it says, okay, I want to have a string, but I got an object, which might be okay, but it's not definitely what you have defined. And so I immediately can see, okay, I need to fix stuff. So if I want to fix this, I could then say, okay, no, I don't want to have the text. And so in theory, if we now do this, so this is live demo, so it should work. Let's see. Send it out. Finish that.
We might have to actually press the reload button. I'm not sure if it's enough to reload the page.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, we're seeing now that this is being sent both as a string as an object.
And so this is basically like, because I sent it before as an object, and so now I'm sending it as a string. And so I can at least see that I sent in an event that basically should fit, I assume. But
and what we recommend doing there, and notice here, Timo is in the development environment for inspector, and you can turn on inspector for staging environments and production as well, so that you get more data flowing in for your current state of your tracking. And then we always recommend when you initialize inspector to include an app version, some sort of an incremental app version. So for example, semantic versioning based on the app releases that you have.
So I could do this here. So I have a version, but of course I don't.
Exactly. And so, for example, if you would now be bumping this version up to a new version, then you would no longer see the object issue as of version 1.0.1, basically.
Let's do this.
So you can see when the issue was introduced and when it was last, which version it was last seen, and things like that. So now it's a really fresh one. If you click into if you expand,
I still have issues here.
Last seen about 14 hours ago. Björsi or Alex, can you refresh my memory how we can see the app version? We should be able to see it. If you click into the web platform and into the issue for that, we go down to the left here. Yeah, here you can see. And maybe it's not loaded, or we hadn't.
Maybe it's not loaded yet. Yeah.
But this would be, and then anytime you click into an issue like this, then you can share a deep link directly to that issue also. Maybe you didn't save your code or something, I don't know, but like this.
Possible.
This should now show like a new version.
Yeah, it doesn't show, so it still shows the old one. And so I mean, so and this is really especially like when you make a deep link, and so you can immediately create a ticket, and you just like, if someone asks you, okay, can you please test it, and then you can basically take the result and can say, yeah, so it looks like this. And so if you have your full tracking plan then here out, and you can really go through and can really see, okay, what is really coming in the right way and what's not. This makes, on the one hand, like initial testing a lot easier, and on the other hand, like, I mean, this is like the thing. I think you can connect it to Slack. I mean, it's quite obvious here, and so you can immediately see, like, you can have a channel where you can immediately see some kind of tracking plan issues that you might have just based on your schema. And there's like your first step. I mean, there are different kind of levels where you can implement monitoring of your tracking setup, but this is the essential first one that you should do, so that you can really make sure that everything comes in as you have defined it. And so that everyone, and because this means everything that works later with this data can expect the data to be like this. And so this is like, which is really powerful, even when you work in Amplitude or Mixpanel, or even when you work in the data warehouse. So you can always be sure that the data ends up like you have defined it.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to be aware of time. We are at time, and we'll probably start seeing people head out soon. This has already been so valuable, Timo. So great to see. It's always wonderful to see someone else dive into setting this up, and it was just magical to see you be able to do this in no time. This took basically minutes to set up, but we also took some time to dive into a few things. So I'm gonna take over the screen a little bit,
Please.
And just say we now we had some questions from the audience during the session, which is great. If you have any follow-up questions, I encourage you to join our community, the righttrack.avo.app. You can also reach out directly to us via intercom or these emails, and we can keep the conversation and follow-up questions around this webinar going in a Slack thread on our community.
Yep.
So any final thoughts you want to add before we end the call, Timo, and the webinar?
So the funny thing is, like, I discover basically Avo in, let's say, like an onion, so in layers. So and I think this might be interesting for other people as well. So it's like, you start first, just move your tracking plan there and work with people together on it. I think this is already a huge change, that you can comment on stuff, you can see how people change other things and so on. And then, for example, you discover Inspector. So you talk with your development team, say, well, we can just extend it and easily see if stuff is coming in. And then, I mean, we didn't even talk about functions and so all the other different kind of things. So you can really discover how you can improve tracking plan by doing it step by step. And so each step basically adds a new, let's say, a new data quality level to your setup. This is quite nice.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. Exactly. So gradual rollout of better data quality and better data governance is what Avo is built for. So no need to rip and replace everything that you have today. Just start small with even a single team using something better than your spreadsheet, and then gradually onboard another team into using something better than your spreadsheet. And installing Inspector into production will enable you to have, even if you only have one team using Avo as a tracking plan management solution, you'll still see an overview of everything else that's going on in the product tracking because of the Inspector. So you can use the Inspector data to also compare what are the events that are flowing into your tracking that are not already in your tracking plan, and use that to update your tracking plan and keep that up to date. And you can also use that to sort of spot when there are any new rogue events coming in that shouldn't be coming in, and drop in volumes and things like that. And then in general, just making that analytics release process easier.
Yeah, and really talk with your developers about this, because often developers already have an abstraction of tracking. So they often really think, okay, it's maybe a good idea to already have a, let's say, a stage of this wrapper function that I already showed. So really like a central place where they have all the tracking events. And this is really great, because there you can really easily extend this to send the schema to Avo as well. So it's not so much work.
Yeah, Awesome. And like you said, you can install the inspector via this simple NPM package or any mobile package as well. And so that's just a one-time install SDK per code base. You can also install it by turning on a segment functions, so as a segment destination basically, and then you can install it via Google Tag Manager as well. And we can share documentations for these both in the community Slack and the webinar resources on the landing page for the registration. But I want to just say thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and thank you for participating in the conversation. Great questions and insights shared by everyone. I think I actually did not manage to publish the poll about the naming convention, so I'll move that to the Red Track community Slack. I created the poll, but I think I didn't manage to publish it. And so I'm curious to hear people's naming conventions as well. Yeah. That's a fun conversation. So we'll share that on the community Slack as well. So please join us on the righttrack.avo.app for our Slack community around managing analytics releases and data quality at the root, fixing data quality at the root, not after the fact, downstream in data pipelines and have to wait for months before someone has time to fix the data. And stay tuned for upcoming webinars. We will actually have another webinar coming up with Timo early April about Google Analytics versus Google Analytics 4. And then we have another webinar coming up also later this month about Avo with CDPs, customer data platforms. So talking about how Avo works with Segment and RudderStack and then Particle. So stay tuned for that and keep your data with high quality. Thank you everyone so much for joining. Thank you Björse and Alex for being firefighters. Turns out this went well because you built such a great product. So that's great. And thank you Timo so much for sharing your wisdom and walking us through how you use Avo and set up the inspector.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a great day everyone.